Canada has abruptly restricted ground access to Alaska, severing a vital artery for American commerce and citizens. The move has triggered a diplomatic firestorm, with former President Donald Trump branding it a hostile blockade and escalating the dispute into a high-stakes standoff. At the heart of the crisis is the Alaska Highway, a lifeline for trade, tourism, and military movement, now choked by new Canadian restrictions. Ottawa frames the action as a domestic policy, but Washington sees it as a direct challenge to American interests. This crisis exposes deep vulnerabilities in the US-Canada relationship, threatening to spiral into a wider trade war and forcing both nations to re-examine their mutual dependencies. As diplomats scramble for solutions, the Alaska access crisis is a stark reminder of how quickly trusted alliances can be shaken. Just days before Canada's controversial move, the city of Anchorage became the unlikely stage for a tense and closely watched summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. The world's attention was fixed on Alaska as the two leaders arrived amid a flurry of speculation and media frenzy. Their primary goal: to find a path toward resolving the ongoing war in Ukraine, a conflict that has sent shockwaves through international relations and left millions displaced. The historic setting, Alaska, once Russian territory, added a layer of symbolism and gravity to these high-stakes talks, reminding everyone of the region's complex past and its role in shaping today's geopolitics. Trump, determined to make headlines, pushed for a quick ceasefire, signaling what many saw as a possible and dramatic shift in US foreign policy toward Russia and the conflict. At the same time, he dangled lucrative business opportunities for Russia, hinting at potential economic cooperation if the talks were to succeed and peace could be brokered. Yet, the notable absence of Ukraine's President Zelensky at the table fueled intense speculation about the true nature of any potential deal, and whether Ukraine's interests were being sidelined. Meanwhile, the presence of NATO's top commander at the summit underscored the immense global stakes, highlighting the delicate balance of power and the risk of escalation. As the world watched these dramatic developments unfold, the summit's timing may have provided political cover for Canada's sudden and restrictive policy, or perhaps it was simply a remarkable coincidence in a week full of surprises. The striking juxtaposition of high-stakes US-Russia diplomacy and a sudden rift with Canada highlights just how interconnected global events can be, and how quickly international tensions can trigger crises at home. In the aftermath, the fallout from Anchorage set the stage for a new, unexpected conflict on the continent. One that would test alliances, challenge old assumptions, and reshape the political landscape of North America. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government imposed strict new regulations on ground transit to Alaska, citing environmental protection and Indigenous land rights. Ottawa insists this is a regulatory measure, not a blockade, but the disruption to the Alaska Highway is severe. Canadian officials point to increased traffic threatening sensitive ecosystems and ongoing treaty negotiations with First Nations. The government frames the move as a principled stand on sovereignty and domestic priorities, not a hostile act toward the US. However, the abruptness and lack of consultation with Washington have fueled American skepticism and anger. Experts affirm Canada's legal right to regulate its infrastructure, but the timing has made the action inseparable from broader US-Canada tensions. The crisis underscores how one nation's internal policy can quickly become another's foreign policy emergency. Trump's response was swift and incendiary, accusing Trudeau of orchestrating an illegal blockade and demanding immediate retaliation. His rhetoric transformed a complex dispute into a rallying cry for American victimhood, galvanizing his base and pressuring the US administration to act tough. Trump called for tariffs and economic penalties, escalating the issue from a regulatory disagreement to a full-blown international incident. The narrative of a blockade dominated media cycles, making compromise politically risky for both sides. Trump's intervention ensured the crisis would not be quietly resolved, instead fueling public outrage and nationalistic fervor. The Alaska access dispute became a central theme in US political messaging, overshadowing diplomatic efforts. The situation demonstrates how a single political figure can shape and inflame the trajectory of an international crisis. Diplomacy has been sidelined by spectacle, making resolution far more difficult. The most immediate impact of Canada's restrictions has been felt by ordinary Americans and businesses relying on the Alaska Highway. truck drivers found themselves stranded, unable to deliver essential goods, sparking fears of shortages and price hikes in Alaska. Families moving to or from the state faced chaos, with few practical alternatives to the land route. The tourism industry, especially RV travelers, saw widespread cancellations, hitting small businesses hard during peak season. Alaska's geographic isolation and reliance on Canada for land access have been starkly exposed. The crisis has moved from political abstraction to daily hardship for thousands, highlighting a critical vulnerability in Alaska's supply chain. Personal stories of disruption underscore the real-world consequences of diplomatic failures. The pressure for a swift resolution grows as economic and human costs mount. The Canadian restrictions have thrown U.S. military logistics into complete disarray, creating a ripple effect that few anticipated. The Pentagon has long relied on the Alaska Highway as a critical artery for relocating personnel, heavy equipment, and vital supplies to key bases in the far north. The sudden closure of this route has brought these operations to a grinding halt, leaving convoys stranded and schedules in chaos. Rerouting shipments by sea or air is not only costly, but also logistically challenging and limited by capacity. These alternatives strain already tight resources, complicating military readiness and response in a region that is strategically vital for U.S. defense. Alaska's role as a cornerstone of U.S. defense, hosting advanced missile systems and fighter squadrons, means that reliable, year-round access is absolutely essential for national security. The crisis has forced the Pentagon to urgently reevaluate contingency plans, exposing vulnerabilities and highlighting the need for more resilient and flexible transportation networks in the future. Military leaders now face mounting costs and logistical headaches, even as they scramble to mitigate the impact on service members and their families who are caught in the uncertainty. This incident serves as a wake-up call, reminding us that even non-military actions by close allies can have immediate and direct consequences for national security and military operations. Ensuring reliable access to Alaska has now become a top defense priority, prompting new strategies and cooperation to prevent future disruptions. The Alaska access crisis has severely strained U.S.-Canada relations, which were once considered among the world's most stable and cooperative partnerships. The sudden disruption has caught both governments off guard, forcing them to confront issues that have long been taken for granted. While Trump's aggressive rhetoric dominates international headlines, diplomats on both sides are scrambling behind the scenes for a workable solution. However, mounting public pressure and intense media scrutiny make any form of compromise politically risky, as leaders fear backlash from their own citizens. Trudeau's government has signaled a willingness to negotiate, proposing creative options such as dedicated transit corridors or special permits for essential travel. These measures are designed to maintain critical connections while addressing security and sovereignty concerns. However, the current political climate is highly charged, and any perceived concession could easily be interpreted as a sign of weakness or defeat, further fueling partisan tensions. The conflict has now spilled over into regional politics. British Columbia's premier has openly threatened to impose new tolls on U.S. commercial traffic, escalating the dispute beyond the control of federal authorities and drawing in local stakeholders. This tit-for-tat dynamic is creating a dangerous spiral, raising the risk of a broader trade war that could have serious economic consequences for both countries and complicate any path toward resolution. The crisis now involves not just national governments, but also powerful provincial interests and regional leaders, making the situation even more complex and difficult to manage. Diplomats must now navigate not only the tense international standoff, but also the intricate and often conflicting internal politics of their closest ally, balancing local demands with national priorities. The standoff has become a delicate balancing act with extremely high stakes for both countries, as the world watches to see whether cooperation or confrontation will ultimately prevail. The Alaska crisis unfolds amid deep domestic turmoil in the U.S., making a unified response difficult. Political divisions and internal crises consume Washington's attention, limiting bandwidth for sensitive international disputes. Globally, cooperation is faltering, with nations prioritizing domestic interests over collective action, mirrored in the U.S.-Canada standoff. The crisis exposes America's geographic dependency on Canada for access to Alaska, shattering assumptions of seamless transit. Calls for investment in alternative routes, like expanding the Alaska Marine Highway, are growing louder. The dispute is more than a border issue. It's a symptom of a turbulent era in international relations. The fallout will linger, forcing both nations to reconsider the terms of their partnership. Canada's restrictions have ignited a diplomatic crisis, disrupting commerce, military logistics, and daily life for Americans. Ottawa's justification, environmental and Indigenous rights, clashed with Trump's confrontational response, escalating the dispute. British Columbia's threat of retaliatory tolls has deepened the conflict, revealing the fragility of the US-Canada relationship. The crisis exposes America's strategic vulnerability and forces a re-evaluation of supply chain security. With domestic turmoil and global fragmentation as the backdrop, a swift resolution is elusive. The Alaska access crisis is a defining moment, testing the alliance and setting a precedent for future conflicts. The world watches to see if these neighbors can rediscover cooperation, or if this marks a new, more contentious era in North American relations.